What we're looking at now is called Preventing the Worst Policies and Procedures, and it's looking at the policies and procedures we can put in place for when things get bad regarding computers to prevent things going wrong or to solve them when they do. And we're going to look at 4 different scenarios of things that can go wrong and what things we put in place to either prevent them from going wrong or to at least make it as minimal damage as possible. And so very proud to present you with our guy who is Alfie, who's going to be taking us through these 4 scenarios. And his day or his week is about to get a whole lot worse. So the first thing which Alfie does is he gets into work, he checks his email, and I guess this could be at school as well. And what he does is he quickly runs off because he needs to go and collect something from the printer. While he's away, someone, he's not sure who, decides that they're going to send an inappropriate email to one of his colleagues, which then says that it's coming from him. Now he thinks he's okay, he of course is not okay, and ends up sitting inside the boss's office being told that he's on his final warning, and if he does something like that again, he's going to be out of the company. Now the reason for this is there's nothing wrong in a way in leaving your computer on its own. That in itself is not a huge problem. The problem is that most companies now will have something called an acceptable use policy. And so while Alfie's not done anything wrong in leaving his computer logged in, an acceptable use policy will have a number of things which you, either as a student in a school or a university or someone working in a company, will have to do as part of that policy. And so the sort of things which it would contain would be that you must lock your computer if you are away from it, which would have prevented the situation of someone sending an email. It will probably say things like you can't spam or send inappropriate messages. It will probably say that you can't access inappropriate websites such as pornography within the company. And so there's a number of different areas. It can even go into the tone of voice or the tone which you use within emails. So if it's a company, they may say exactly how you're going to lay that out, exactly what things are going to be contained within it. The acceptable use policy could even get into the types of passwords that you use. And so really it's to deal with anything which isn't covered by law. The company's saying, within our company, we expect you to do these things that are reasonable, and then if you don't do them, the company or the school then has the ability to give you some kind of sanction against that, which is right up to including being sacked from your job or having to leave the school. So let's go for scenario 2. And so this time Alfie's at work, accidentally clicks his mouse. He thought that he was moving some files, and he goes and realizes that he's actually gone and deleted them all. I'm sure that all of us at some point have deleted a file or lost some work which we wanted to retrieve back. Solution is, or what he attempts to begin with, is he goes running up to his IT support team, pretty much in tears, and says, "Can you get my work back?" And fortunately for Alfie in this occasion, they do get the work back. Now, what this comes under is that a company or a school or organisation, or even yourselves, you need to have a backup procedure. And the backup procedure which you choose needs to be something which is reasonable for the type of things you're backing up. So if you're a home user, you might find that backing up once a week because you only use your computer occasionally is absolutely fine. However, for a business, if they're only backing up once a week and they lose that computer or that hard disk, they could lose a whole week's work, which for some businesses would be enough to put them under and everyone loses their job. So typically a backup procedure will say how often it needs to be backed up, and that could be incremental. So it could be a backup which happens, almost minutely, or certainly every few minutes. It's taking copies as files are made, as files are deleted. Or it could be a daily backup, or it could be weekly, or it could be some combination of all of these. And the backup procedure will also say what's going to happen to those copies. So the incremental ones, which are happening all the time, may be happening on a second hard disk, so that they're immediately available. If you delete a file, you can immediately go up and say, I need a copy of that file, and you can get it instantly because it's an incremental backup. For instance, the daily ones might be stored off-site or in a fireproof safe. So the idea of being off-site, if we have 2 hard disks, there's a backup in that company and there's a fire, suddenly we've lost our backup as well as our main computers. So we store them off-site so that if something goes wrong, there's an arson attack or whatever, then we're absolutely fine, we can still retrieve our data. And that could be the same for a weekly backup. It may be stored at a different location. And this backup procedure is there to meet the company's requirements or the school's requirements. And so it depends on the situation as to how often you would back up. So the third scenario, having had a pretty bad week, he goes off abroad and to a country such as Japan, although there's lots of countries with earthquakes and lots of countries that have tsunamis, and finds that he's lost not only his work that he was working on, fortunately he escapes to the top of the building, but all of the computers have gone now, and some of the backups have gone, the local backups have gone that were stored on site, and things are not too good. Fortunately, within hours, he's able to get himself to a different city where the company has its head office, and all of those employees that fortunately survived managed to carry on working. Now, the thing which covers this scenario is something which is known as a disaster recovery plan. And this is a rather extreme example. It's something which is totally realistic, but it's an extreme example of what can happen. And the disaster recovery plan here might be, there's 2 offices in 2 completely separate cities. Both of them are very unlikely to be affected at the same time. So although it would be a squash, if one company suffers a catastrophic disaster, then it will be possible to move them to the second location. So it could be, as part of the disaster recovery plan, that there's going to be relocation of staff, and they'll have a number of computers which are available in that office. More likely, smaller disaster recovery plans might be something like a fire in the offices, and so all of the computers go, and suddenly you've got to get around that disaster. That would be something more common perhaps in a country like England. And so what you're looking at there within your disaster recovery plan, you're looking at your backup procedures. If we had a fire, would we have backups that are off-site? We're looking very much also at alternative hardware. So there are companies that deal with disaster recovery, and so they will have an amount of hardware, and you'll have a contract with them that if you were to have a fire or if you needed the hardware, you could suddenly, so many hours or a day's notice, suddenly get all that hardware in order to put into a new office. And there would also need to be a procedure to restore data from the backups to the alternative hardware which you've bought or which you've managed to obtain. And so the important thing about a disaster recovery plan is looking at, if these disasters happened, how would we get our company or our school or whatever kind of organisation it is, how would we get that back again and working and operating as quickly as possible? Because disasters do happen, and the last thing you want, on top of having an earthquake and a tsunami or a fire in an office, on top of that, the last thing you want to do is find out the next day you have no job to go to or no school to go to. So disaster recovery plans are really important, and that's how we solve those types of problems, or at least reduce how bad they are. And the final scenario 4 which we've got is one, and I'm sure you've all experienced, where you go to a web page and it doesn't appear. There's either no message or that it says the server's down or something like that. And so here we've got Malfi, who's trying to get over all these ordeals, and he's shopping on Nile.com, and suddenly he finds he can't buy his latest pair of shoes. And the way that we deal with this one, and it's if you look at big sites, massive sites like Amazon and Google, these huge sites are very, very rarely down or not operating correctly. And the reason for that is that they're making use of redundant hardware. So instead of having just one computer, so just one server over here, which is dealing with your company, you will have a lot of servers and a lot of redundant hardware. And so the idea is, one of the ways that they'll do it with hard disks, for example, is you will have your standard hard disk, and sitting alongside it, you will have a second hard disk which has a mirror, so an exact copy of the data which is on the first hard disk. Now, if hard disk number 1 fails, so that hard disk fails, it doesn't matter at all, because instantly the computer will use the second hard disk, which has an exact replica copy of what was on the first hard disk. And what will happen is they will take this hard disk out while the computer's still on, and then they'll put a brand new hard disk that works into the computer. And so within a minute, the computer is now operating just as it did before, with the same potential redundancy that it had before, and if the hard disk fails, there's no problem at all. Other solutions are to have multiple servers. So like we have here, you may need many servers to serve the site, but you'll have spare servers which can instantly take the load of the first ones. And it could be that you also have your servers on one site, and then if the site goes down, there'll be another site at a completely different location, possibly in the same country, possibly in a completely different country, and that again will have a set of servers. And so if for some reason there's some kind of power failure or some catastrophic failure that occurs on your main farm of servers, so the main place that stores your servers, no problem at all, because there's another set of servers we can use, and we can just direct the traffic. Instead of going to one location, we can just direct it to go to a different location. So the thing which deals with having this problem of computers going down and having to prevent that is called failover, or a failover procedure, or failover policy. And this is about keeping the system going at all times. And so what we're doing is we're building in resilience to our computer system. So resilient means it will keep going, and we're also building in fault tolerance and in addition to that, what we have is redundant hardware, and redundant means more than we actually need. And so when something breaks, we can instantly put that redundant hardware in, and that gives us fault tolerance, it gives us resilience, and that's part of our failover procedural policy. So we've looked at 4 different scenarios, and there's 4 things that we can use in policy or procedure to deal with those. So we can have an acceptable use policy. That means that people within a company or within an organisation, a school, have to do things a certain way, the way that we think is acceptable. So we lay that down by an acceptable use policy. We have backup procedures to make sure if people accidentally delete files, or if files get corrupted, then we can always get back to where we were. We have a backup of that. We have disaster recovery plans, which make sure that in a disaster, a fire, a tidal wave, earthquake, whatever it happens to be, we have a way of getting the company, getting the organisation back up and running. And we have failover procedures or policies which make sure that our computer systems are up for as much of the time as possible. So we know that things will go wrong, and we have redundant systems, redundancy, to make sure that we can get those systems back up and running again.